Great. These are our newly elected officers. You can see the group here on the slide that Summer put together for us. So I am the Regional Vice President for the Middle Atlantic region. And as your RVP, I am excited to swear in the new board. Do you pledge yourselves to support the Society's strategic plan and carry out faithfully the duties of the offices to which you have been elected or appointed?
I do.
I'm going to count that as everybody said I do. All right, and now the outgoing and new president, if you will take a virtual step forward. So as the new president, do you pledge yourself to support the Society's strategic plan and carry out the duties of the president of the Central Virginia Post to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, I now declare the newly elected officers and directors of the Central Virginia Post to be duly installed. I would ask that if we had our physical charter, that you turn that over, George, to Mike. Hopefully we'll be able to do that, get our physical charter and be able to do that in person in August. Additionally, in August, I will be presenting George Niefler with an RVP coin to thank him for his service as president of the Central Virginia Post during this really, really hard year where we didn't get to do the things that we normally would do as a post. So thank you, George, for your service. And Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to speak on your term as president.
All right. Thank you, Leanne. On behalf of the membership and the board of directors, I'd also like to thank George for his post leadership throughout this past year. We all know how challenging it has been. And as we look forward to the next year, my goal is to take the base that George successfully held on to, work with him closely as our past president, you're not off the hook yet, sir, and the rest of our board to really make 21-22 a year of coming in from our kitchen tables, rebuild and grow the Post back to providing value to our membership, even more so than the Post did before 2020. I think it's going to be a great year. And with that, thank you again, George. And Leanne, I'll turn it back to you for today's program.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So today we are talking about CMMC, which is a very important topic for all of us as contractors to the federal government. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Keith Morneau, who is the Dean of Computer and Information Science at ECPI University. He'll be moderating our conversation today. Quick Zoom housekeeping item, sorry about that. So all attendees are in listen-only mode. Use the Q&A button to ask questions during the presentation, and use the chat feature if you have technical issues that need assistance. The presentation is being recorded, so please keep any kind of disruption to a minimum. And if you are a panelist and you want to ask a question, you'll need to use the chat. Panelists cannot use Q&A. All right, and so Dr. Keith Morneau will be asking the questions, and our panelists today are, we have Vincent Ross. He's Senior Sales Manager for Identify, and he is responsible for managing the North American sales team focused on identity and authentication. And then in trust, so in the business of enabling trust for 50+ years, extensive world-class portfolio expanding across digital security and identity offerings, and trusted by some of the world's largest governments, financial institutions, and corporations. Nearly every US federal agency is an Entrust customer. So Vincent will be kind of running the slides and helping us with answering any questions. And if you want to go ahead and share your slideshow. Our presenter today is Stuart Itkin, the Vice President of CMMC and FedRAMP Assurance at Coalfire Federal, responsible for the company's CMMC RPO advisory services and C3PAO assessment services, and for its FedRAMP 3PAO assessment services for federal. Coalfire has 20 years of experience providing cybersecurity services to a wide range of government and commercial organizations, and one of the first authorized CMMC C3 PAOs at a CMMC Pro. I will turn it over now to Stuart. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leanne. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thanks. So I'll be driving the slides today for Stuart. Just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be joining this webinar. And the topic that obviously we want to address today is a time to prepare for CMMC. And as you mentioned, Leanne, my name is Vince Ross, and I work for a company called Entrust. I'm a senior sales manager that focuses on identity and authentication. And I think you also mentioned, but as we go through, there's probably a lot of questions that should arise. And please feel free to do that in the chat, and we can address that at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm excited to present and pass the mic over to Stuart.
Well, great. Vince, thanks very much. And I mean, first, let me just kind of demystify some of the alphabet soup. I think when we work with government, we take it for granted that everybody understands the three-letter acronyms that are there. CMMC kind of has taken it a step further and added kind of longer acronyms. But as a C3PAO, that means we're an organization who is certified to assess companies with respect to their compliance with CMMC. As an RPO, or a registered practitioner organization, we're able to provide advisory services to organizations that are preparing for CMMC. The restriction is, of course, we can't do that for, or both of those for the same organization. A lot to cover with respect to CMMC. CMMC is going to have a huge impact on every one of us and every one of our businesses. And I think it's important to understand CMMC was created to be able to protect the DoD supply chain from cyber attacks that were intended to exfiltrate information, and that ultimately we're being pretty darn successful at exfiltrating sensitive defense information. But before we kind of dive into it, I think it's important to have an understanding of why CMMC's mission is so critical. And the answer has a lot to do with submarines. So let me talk a little bit about submarines. Vince, if we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So submarines. Today within the United States, our submarine fleet is really a powerful part of our nuclear deterrent, and the safety of our nation, our security as a nation, is dependent on the Navy's fleet of 71 active submarines, and the ability of those submarines to be able to fulfill their mission. Submarines are important. Submarine warfare also played an important role during the Second World War. And the difference was that the submarines involved weren't ours. They belonged to Germany at that time. Our war efforts in Europe depended on the supply chain that provided goods to those troops within the north, or that were in the European theater. And they depend on our ability to be able to transport goods across the North Atlantic Ocean to be able to support our troops and our allies. And over the course of World War II, the United States ran 450 convoys across the North Atlantic. And necessarily, these became the prime target of German U-boats in their effort to disrupt the war effort. And their efforts were successful going into the first part of the war. In total, 350 of our ships were sunk in the North Atlantic by German U-boats, and tens of thousands of US and Allied lives were lost. And the submarine fleet within the German military remained effective in fulfilling its mission until we were able to steal the cipher, or the secret codes that enabled them to transmit information. And once we were able to do that, again, we were able to kind of avoid where their submarines are. So if we can go to the next slide, Alan Turing is really why CMMC is important. If you saw the movie, The Imitation Game, Alan Turing was played by Benedict Cumberbunch. And while we didn't exactly steal their cryptography, his creation of what was called the bomb enabled our allies to decode German ciphers, German messages, up to a rate of about 84,000 of them a month. And again, as I mentioned, it just gave us the ability to know where their fleets were. It gave us the opportunity to just kind of circumnavigate where the U-boats were located. And as a consequence, it's credited for having saved millions of lives and for accelerating the end of World War II. And so, again, as I said, just as the Germans depended on their submarine fleet, we depend on ours today. And like Germany, who depended on the ability to communicate in secret, so do we. And like the Germans whose cryptography was stolen, well, actually, so was ours. And the only difference is that we were able to find out about it and to be able to react to it, unlike the Germans, who were unaware that we were kind of reading their mail as it was going across. And in June of 2018, the Washington Post reported an incident referred to as Sea Dragon. And in the course of this, we were able to detect that 614 gigabytes of data were stolen by the Chinese. And this included not only our cipher information, but undersea warfare data, plans for hypersonic or undersea missiles, and so forth. And again, just imagine the potential impact on our safety if, in fact, the Chinese knew exactly where every one of our submarines was, what it was doing, where it was headed, and the ability of our submarine fleet to be able to really execute its mission in that case. And this is why CMMC is important. It's about being able to protect that sensitive information. And another example is the Lockheed F-35 strike fighter. It took the United States and Lockheed Martin as the prime contractor almost a decade to develop the F-35 strike fighter. The total program cost was greater than $1 trillion, yet within 2 years of the introduction of the F-35, the Chinese unveiled their J-31, which was literally a carbon copy of the F-35. And it was based exclusively on CUI, or controlled but unclassified information, that was stolen not from Lockheed Martin, but from suppliers across the supply chain that were supporting Lockheed Martin in being able to develop and ultimately manufacture the F-35. This is why CMMC is important. And the recognition that our adversaries aren't going to attack Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin's pretty locked down. Their cyber defenses are pretty formidable. But when you start to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 layers deep in the supply chain, then the cyber defenses of those organizations tend to be less sophisticated and more vulnerable. This is what Ellen Lord, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, referred to as the soft underbelly of the supply chain. And this is what CMMC is intended to protect. If we can go to the next slide. So again, the motivation for CMMC, it's to enhance our ability to protect, for suppliers to protect CUI, controlled unclassified information, and FCI, federal contract information, in the DoD supply chain. We could have a long and separate conversation about what is CUI and what is not CUI, and I expect we'll probably have some questions that are related to it. But the kind of the motivating factor was that there were programs in effect prior to this, and organizations and many of you who may be subject to the 7012 242.204.7012 DFARS clause have been subject to being or complying with NIST 800-171. And what just proved was that NIST 800-171 just wasn't being effective. It required organizations to simply comply and address a need, but not necessarily to be secure. And generally, when somebody is looking at a program or a regimen from a compliance perspective, it's what is the cheapest alternative that I can find that enables me to check a box. Not to say is it working or not, but again, what can I do so I can say check I've done that. Second, NIST 800-171 incorporated a concept called POAMs, or plans of actions and milestones. POAMs are not uncommon to other frameworks, but 800-171 allowed you to address a requirement without satisfying it, and you could address it by having a POAM. It's kind of the promise that I'm going to do something. You know, I don't have a lock on the front door to my house yet. I haven't locked it, but I promise that I'm going to do that. You know, a burglar isn't probably going to say, okay, I'm not going to bother you because I know you're going to put a lock in. And so POAMs not only were ineffective, but they really created a disadvantage to organizations that were secure. You know, if you're competing against, you know, supplier B, your supplier A, and you've gone to the effort of complying with NIST 800-171, implementing those security controls, maintaining those security controls, well, it doesn't come free. And those costs affect your overall overhead. And so when you're creating a bid against, let's say, supplier B, who simply said, well, I'm going to satisfy the majority of these by promising I'm going to write POAMs, their costs, their overhead is going to be lower. If the bid is simply awarded on the basis of price, well, your competitor is going to be the low bidder. Kind of the motivation to really not implement security because it puts you at a competitive advantage. And finally, NIST 800-171 involved self-attestation. You went through and you graded your own test. Here's the 110 controls that you need to satisfy. And let me go through and say, okay, have I done this? And what happened was that organizations weren't looking at these controls consistently. And an individual organization was perhaps a little bit more prone to give themselves the benefit of the doubt and say, you know, that's kind of good enough. And when DCMA went through and did a series of audits of organizations that said they had satisfied all 110 controls, they found, in fact, that none of them had fully complied with those controls. So CMMC, if we can go to the next slide, was intended to address these deficiencies that existed within the prior regimen of NIST 800-171. The idea is that ultimately this is going to be a universal standard across the government. Today it affects DoD and those in the supply chain to the DoD only, but again, expected to expand. CMMC looks at maturity rather than looking at, at compliance. Again, compliance is just simply doing something. Maturity is ensuring that you've done something, that you're using it or following it, you've institutionalized it, and that it's working. Let me kind of give a couple of real quick examples because the maturity concept is really important to all of this. Prior company that I worked with sold a product that provided secure file sharing and FIPS 140-2 validated encryption, which is a government requirement. It's a requirement of CMMC. And we found that we were selling this to a number of contractors. And we went back and looked, we saw that they were never using this product. There was zero utilization. And we went back and said, just wanted to make sure, is there any problem? Why aren't you using this? And their answer was, well, we simply needed to be able to say, we have a means of securely sharing information with our suppliers. They were able to check the box. Were they doing it? No. Were they using other means that were less secure? Yes. The other notion about maturity is it's about institutionalizing these practices of CMMC, again, about actually doing it. And so another example of this is around something like incident response. There's a requirement in CMMC to have an incident response plan. There's a requirement in CMMC, if you look at the list of controls, it's IR.3.099 that requires that you've tested your incident response plan. And what it's asking is, if we kind of remember, and I guess we still do this in our offices, that from time to time, we'll have a fire drill, make sure everybody knows who's the warden or the captain, where you're supposed to go. I mean, my kids do these or did do them, certainly in school when they attended school, to make sure you knew what to do in the event that there was a fire. CMMC is essentially the same way. It's asking you to have fire drills. And so to be able to demonstrate maturity for IR 3.099, The requirement is going to be that you have to have had or have done something like a tabletop exercise or a practice, and you have to have that documented and to be able to show to the assessor, not just something that's on paper that says, yeah, if we have a breach, this is what we're going to do, but actually to be able to demonstrate that you've institutionalized it, that you're using it and following it. CMMC requires third-party assessments rather than an organization grading their own test. This is to ensure that there is consistency in the way that individual companies are evaluated. And probably one of the more difficult things about CMMC is it is a 100% conforming standard. Every one of its requirements needs to be satisfied, not just addressed. And if you've not satisfied all of them at level 3, which is the basic level, if you're handling controlled and classified information, there are 130 practices. You need to satisfy every single one of them. Failing to do one essentially fails you from qualifying and could make you ineligible for a government contract. CMMC introduces 5 different levels of maturity. I mentioned maturity again with respect to being able to demonstrate that you're actually using something. I'll explain a little bit more about this again, but the important part again is CMMC is hard. It's not just simply, okay, let's go through and take the test. There's a lot of preparation that needs to go in place to ensure that you truly have satisfied the requirements of CMMC. And it's just not technical requirements, they're procedural requirements and policy requirements. So we go to the next slide. CMMC, as I mentioned, at level 3 has 130 practices. At level 1, which is the fundamental level, if you're only handling FCI or contract information, there are 17. And if you're at level 5, there are 171. And there will be very few organizations that actually need to get to that level. There are 17 domains in which these practices are grouped. And I'll kind of go over these quickly. Access control is really about ensuring and guarding who has access to your IT environment. Things like multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, and so forth. Asset management covers how you take care of assets like laptops, as well as how you take care of information. Audit and accountability involves recording or keeping records and logs of the activities that occur, primarily for forensic reasons. If something occurs, to be able to go back so that you can potentially or hopefully determine where it came from. Awareness and training is about ensuring that your employees are aware of their responsibilities. Configuration management is all about establishing a baseline that satisfies the CMMC requirements, having inventories of software and equipment, and then having change management procedures to verify that any changes that are made to the environment, again, maintain compliance with CMMC. Identification and authentication is about ensuring the people who you bring in are eligible to handle CUI. There are certain requirements. For example, if somebody is handling ITAR information, which is a specialized category of CUI, are they a US citizen? In general, is it somebody who, again, has passed a background check, is eligible to handle CUI? And when somebody applies and says, hi, I'm Bob Smith, is the person applying, is Bob Smith really Bob Smith? Incident response is about having preparation to respond to an event so that you know what to do ahead of time. Maintenance is about, again, in keeping things up to date and current. Personal security is about ensuring that that those within your organization have completed background checks and screening, and that they do not represent security risks. Physical security is largely about your facility. How do you ensure that only those that are authorized have access to your work environments, especially those environments where controlled information or controlled and classified information may appear. Recovery is about keeping backups so that you can recover from an incident. Risk management is intended to ensure that you understand where risks exist within your organization so that you can triage or prioritize those risks in addressing them. It is related to security assessment. Security assessment is largely about having a system security plan that documents your security controls. Situational awareness is kind of being aware that the environment that we find ourselves, the threat environment, changes. The tactics of our adversaries continually evolve, and to ensure that we're remaining vigilant and responding to changes in the way that we're being attacked. And the last two, system communications and protection and system information and integrity, are kind of catch-alls for a number of different requirements, from protecting communication channels to being able to identify malicious content, malware, flaws in your systems, and so forth. Again, a lot of detail, and in total there are 130 specific practices that fall within these 17 domains if you need to be certified at level 3. If we go to the next slide, CMMC also includes the concept of processes, and this really relates to the maturity. Maturity model essentially defines the requirements to achieve a next higher level or standard of security. And so that as we look through this, the number of practices increase as we go from level to level. Level 1 for FCI has 17 practices or controls, 130 at level 3, 158 at level 4, and 171 at level 5. CMMC also, again, introduces the level or the notion of processes. And so with each level, there are an increasing level of process requirements that exist. At level 1, you just simply need to be doing it. At level 2, you need to be able to have policies that document what you're doing. At level 3, which is considered kind of good cyber hygiene, you not only need to have policies, but you need to have procedures that document how those things are done. Level 4 is referred to as proactive cybersecurity. There, it's a lot about ensuring that you have measurement and ability to identify and respond. And then level 5 is about having consistency across an enterprise and having in place what are referred to, well, controls to be able to deal with essentially advanced persistent threats. Something like the SolarWinds attack was one that was certainly advanced. It was persistent, meaning it hung around quite some time before we found it. In fact, we were very fortunate that that FireEye was able to identify and find that. So again, I want to give you a sense for why this is hard. Again, I hope you understand why it's important, but again, I want you to understand or come away with, why this is hard, and kind of back to the theme of this, why do you need to start now? So we can go to the next slide. So I'm not going to walk through this, only to make the point of this maps the set of practices against the 17 domains at the top. And so this is the kind of the checkerboard of things that need to be addressed. Things that are in orange can generally be addressed by creating policies and standards and processes. The light blue ones are generally security settings within your environment. The green and the purple require hardware and software solutions, and the gold can either be addressed through configuration changes or through hardware and software. But again, every one of these requirements must be satisfied. It's 100% conforming standard. Miss one and you fail. And every requirement must be fully supported with objective evidence. When you're assessed, you're going to not only be able to, to say, I've done this, but you're going to need to have it documented in the SSP. You're going to need to have policies. You're going to have procedures. These are all going to be looked at by the assessor. They all need to be consistent. What you say needs to be consistent with what is documented, needs to be consistent with the way it works. And as an assessor, we would come in and make sure that not only do you have everything, but that everything you have is sufficient. Yes, I have a policy, but is the policy sufficient in dealing this? And when we think, wow, this is a lot, if we can go to the next slide, it actually gets a little bit more. If I look at the very first practice, which is AC 1.001, access control, limit information systems access to authorized users' processes, acting on behalf of authorized users or devices. There are actually 6 requirements that are listed underneath that. And each of these 6 requirements for AC 1.001 needs to be satisfied. And so again, as you're going through and preparing for CMMC, this is the level of rigor and detail that needs to be done. So we can go to the next slide, please. So what do we know about certification? We know it's hard. Again, a lot of detail in this test. It takes time. Start now. Being able to ensure that you've addressed all of these requirements and you've addressed them sufficiently is something that, again, is going to require cost. It's going to take time, and it's absolutely not easy. The purpose of an assessment, an assessor is going to want to verify that you've demonstrated a threshold level of cyber maturity at the level that you've required, if it's level 1, level 3, level 4, or level 5. Again, I would assume organizations listening to this are likely to need to achieve level 3 certification. Again, as I said, it's 100% conforming. Every practice needs to be satisfied. There are no POAMs. And maturity is about demonstrating that you're doing these things, that cybersecurity is an organizational priority and that you've institutionalized these things, and you've gone through the fire drills and you've documented the fire drills to know or to demonstrate that you actually know how to do and that the things that you're doing work. If we can go to the next slide. I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges with 800-171 was that it was applied inconsistently. An organization graded its own test. Now, assessments are conducted by C3PAOs or a CMMC third-party assessment organization. These are authorized by the CMMC accreditation body. It's hard to become a C3PAO. Among the requirements are experience, background checks, must be a US company, the list goes on. Working for C3PAOs are assessment teams. These assessment teams are led by certified assessors or CAs. And I guess the good news is this is kind of an open book test. The test criteria are well defined. 3 documents, their URLs are listed here. The CMMC framework model is available, as are the assessment guides. And if you need to be assessed at level 3, the CMMC level 3 assessment guide is essentially describes exactly what you need to do. It describes exactly what an assessor is going to do in the course of the assessment. Again, is it hard? Well, the assessment guide at level 3 is 430 pages long. Those are the things that you need to be able to have satisfied. We can go to the next slide, please. So, when people ask about how long this is going to take, it really is a journey, and it is dependent on a number of things, like where are you starting from, and ultimately which level do you need to go to. But in kind of, I think, if we simplify the process, it first starts with identifying what is it that needs to be secured or protected. What is the CUI? What is the FCI that your organization handles? And generally, to make this process more simple, to make this process less expensive, it's nice to be able to, it's beneficial to be able to kind of corral the CUI that you have and isolate it to an independent enclave or an independent set of systems, and essentially let that define the boundary for the CMMC assessment, not your entire enterprise. In some cases, It's going to be incredibly expensive. If a large part of your business is commercial and only a small part of your business is government, it will be expensive to do the whole enterprise rather than a small enterprise. If your business is international, it just may not be possible to be CMMC compliant without isolating CUI data and ITAR data. Once you've defined what is in scope, the second part is to be able to determine what is the delta between my current state and what it is that I need to achieve to be able to be CMMC compliant. And again, this is not just security controls. It may have to do with the architecture of your system, with the policies that you have, the procedures that are documented. The next stage is to be able to go through and kind of fix all of those things. And finally, once you're done, we recommend that you validate that by kind of taking a mock assessment. Let me go through and test and make sure that I've done these things. We go to the next slide. The question comes up a lot about, well, what is the cost of a certification? And often people are focused on calling the C3PAO and how much the C3PAO is going to charge to go through that process. I assure you that's probably the smallest cost component of becoming CMMC certified. The efforts with respect to identifying your CUI, isolating it, or creating the secure enclave in which your CUI is going to be contained, going through and doing whatever re-architecture, re-engineering, and adding the security controls that are required to be able to address the gaps. Those are the real costs, and those are the things that will take time. Again, the cost is really a function of what maturity level you need to achieve. It's going to be more for level 4 than level 3. It's how complex your environment is. If you make the environment that needs to be CMMC certified small, the time and the cost is going to be smaller. And it's also where you're starting from. Some organizations are very locked down. They're very cyber mature. Others are less so. And depending on where you're starting from, will really determine the nature of the journey. Let me touch just a little bit on the assessment itself and what's it going to involve. If we can go to the next slide. That for each of these requirements, for each of these practices, so again, 6 requirements under the one AC 1.001 practice, for each and every one of them, an assessor is going to come in and employ 2 of 3 assessment methods for each. And the assessment methods are, they can interview you, they can examine, or they can test. Let me give an example for this. One of the requirements of CMMC involves having an inactivity timeout for workstations. Essentially, it means that if a workstation is inactive for a certain period of time, the screen will go blank or a screensaver will come on. And the way you're going to handle an activity timeout, or I'm sorry, inactivity timeout has to be documented in your policy. And it says that to support this, we will, or a screensaver will engage within, let's say, 15 minutes of the beginning of an inactivity period. And that's how you've implemented, that's what your policy says. Okay. Well, if an assessor comes in, the assessor may say, okay, let me talk to the head of security. Okay, thank you. Let me ask you about inactivity. What happens if somebody leaves their workstation? How do you address the requirement for an activity timeout? Person being interviewed should say, well, we have a screensaver that is activated 15 minutes after that occurs. The assessor may say, great, I'd like to now see your policy. And the policy should say exactly what the interviewer or the interviewee just said. And the assessor can go to the final step and to be able to say, okay, great, I'd like to test this. So let's bring a workstation. I'd like you to sign on to it. And then we're going to wait 15 minutes. And I want to verify that, in fact, the screensaver is invoked. And again, the assessor can choose any 2 of those 3. The organization that is being certified can kind of help influence that, can make suggestions, but ultimately it's the assessor that is going to determine which of these assessment methods are going to be applied for each of these. And again, I mentioned adequacy and sufficiency earlier. It's not just about ensuring that you've implemented, let's say, that inactivity, the inactivity timeout, but that you have it fully documented and the policy describes exactly what's going to happen when, and that you have a procedure that somebody can follow in the event that the person who is responsible wins the lottery and says, hey, I'm not coming to work anymore. But the quality of the documentation and the depth of the documentation is as important in CMMC as the actual controls itself themselves, because the documentation is what's providing evidence of maturity. And there will be other documentation that is required. Again, it said something like for IR 3.099, demonstrate that your incident response plan has been tested, that having a copy of that, having that objective evidence is part of the documentation that needs to be provided. So try to go through the rest of this a little more quickly. The assessment process itself, if we can go to the next slide. When you're ready to take a CMMC assessment, the list of available C3PAOs will be on the CMMC accreditation body marketplace. You get to choose who you work with. You can ask multiple C3PAOs for quotes and make a determination as to which one you want to work with. You can do that on the basis of probably several things. Since there is an on-site component, probably choosing somebody who is in your city as opposed to across the country is going to cost you less, because they're going to be able to drive in a car rather than having to fly on an airplane and charge you for that. There's some C3PAOs that are going to have more familiarity with one environment or technology stack than another. There may be a C3PAO that says, hey, we understand Azure GovCloud, and we understand Microsoft GCC High, and so we can understand your environment. If you're stood up in AWS, you may want to choose an assessor whose expertise and familiarity is with the AWS environment and tools. Once there is a determination on your part, the C3PAO is going to schedule the assessment. There will be a planning meeting to be able to inform you of which information is required and that you need to have available. There will be a kickoff meeting where all of those involved will be present, that the specific evidence that the assessment team is going to want to see will be laid out. And then the assessment occurs over a period of days. For level 3, that's probably between 5 and 8 days on site. Again, going through and either interviewing, examining, or testing each and every one of those requirements. There'll be a wrap-up meeting at the end of the day, and this is really kind of the assessment box. And at the end of this, you'll receive a readout from the assessment team providing feedback with respect to the outcome. Did they feel that you had satisfied all of the requirements? Or if not, in the report, they will say, these are the items that we believe as a certified assessment organization were not satisfied, and for this reason, we can't pass you. Again, to pass, you need to satisfy every single one of these. If we can go to the next slide, that there are some exception conditions, and if there are some minor findings in the course of the assessment, there can be a request from the organization being certified to the C3PAO to provide a remediation period to be able to fix those things. It could be something as small as, gee, the timeout didn't quite come on when it's said in the documentation, and a parameter needs to be adjusted. Again, these are small findings, not big findings, and in which case the C3PAO can say, we'll provide you up to 90 days to remediate minor issues. And then we will come back and we'll just retest only those issues that were that failed initially, that we indicated needed to be remediated. And at that point, if the assessor says, yes, we believe everything is fine, they can submit the report to the AB, and if the AB agrees, they will again review the information from the OSC or about the organization seeking certification and grant the certification upon review of the assessment that was performed. Now, what happens if you go through this process and you just disagree with the assessor, and the assessor says you failed this control, and you say, no, you don't understand, the way we satisfy this is by such and such, and the assessor says, no, you haven't, I disagree, I'm failing you, then then there is the opportunity to be able to ask for adjudication. If we go to the next slide. And so if you disagree with the finding of the C3PAO, the OSC, and I apologize, an organization seeking certification, has 7 days to submit an adjudication request to the CMMC accreditation body. The accreditation body will take these seriously. They will thoroughly audit the assessment that had been performed, and they will provide a finding within 30 days as to whether they believe that you have passed or not passed. So just a couple of kind of closing thoughts. First, on the next slide, with respect to minimizing cost, risk, and time. I hope it's clear from what I've shared that this is hard, and it's very, very exacting. And the best way to ensure that you're going to satisfy the requirements is to engage an advisor who is conversant, who knows the CMMC requirements. And again, we recommend that you bring in a qualified organization. There's a benefit to an organization that is both a RPO or a advisory firm and a C3PAO, an assessment firm, because they will know kind of the perspective that the assessor is going to take in looking at your environment. And so when they do an initial gap assessment and say, here are the things that you need to address, they're doing it from the perspective that an assessor would take. In full disclosure, we are one of those. We're an organization that provides advisory and assessments, but there are a number of good organizations out there that do both. The only caveat is there is also something in America called free speech. And so there are a lot of organizations out there that say, hey, we can help you with CMMC. Not all are qualified. And so just vet who it is that you choose to potentially work with. Second, you don't need to start from scratch. And without getting into a lot of detail, there are a number of different reference architectures, kind of blueprints that you can follow to be able to create environments and policies and procedures that do satisfy the CMMC requirements. And so look for these. And finally, leveraging cloud services provides a great way of kind of sharing these CMMC responsibilities. If you're using, let's say, Azure GovCloud and GCC Hive for Microsoft, the physical security requirement to make sure that your data center has a locked door and has a log of visitors, you've now transferred that responsibility to Microsoft, and Microsoft is going to say, hey, we've got you covered. We make sure that we don't let just anybody into our facility. And using cloud services gives you the ability to inherit some of these controls from the cloud service provider, or to be able to get some of these requirements from the cloud service provider. So again, these are three things that could potentially make this journey less expensive. It can make it less, take less time, and certainly reduce some of the risk that's associated with it. Kind of the last slide, and kind of looking forward, is that this is really an evolving program. It is a new program. The intent is that 15 contracts will have CMMC requirements in 2021. It'll affect about 1,500 of the 350,000 organizations in the defense industrial base. And this is to give DoD and the CMMC accreditation body the opportunity to kind of make adjustments on what's working and what's not working. And it's likely to evolve. Again, the mission of CMMC is way too critical. It's not going to go away, but it will certainly change in some ways. And a lot of the emphasis is about how do we make this easier for small and medium businesses without really taking any of the teeth out of the program. Second, and this is where the program started, it said, think about cyber maturity, don't think about compliance. And when you look at things, again, think about, is what I'm doing going to make me secure? Are there things that I need to be doing to really make sure that the things that I'm choosing are working and having the impact that they need to? And final point is, this was conceived of as a universal standard. We know that there are other agencies across the government, the federal government, that are looking at CMMC. DHS is in line and has stated their intent to adopt CMMC. We're told the Treasury is very anxious to move into CMMC once DoD rolls it out, meaning the entire financial services industry will be affected by CMMC. So I know I covered a lot of ground. This is something that that is a mile wide and a mile deep, and I think I've gone kind of the mile wide, but maybe only an inch deep. Certainly, please feel free to reach out outside of this. I think my contact information, my email, was on the first slide that was shown. But let me certainly answer any questions that may have come in.
So I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A, but I thought about and reformulated 1,000 times my own question, which is, I wanted to ask, when would we see the benefits of this? But the hard thing about that is, obviously, if you're adhering to this program, you're going to see the benefits just by securing your own cybersecurity. Like, there are intrinsic benefits to your company. But my real question is, when will people see a contracting benefit to this? When would we have an advantage with the federal government in pursuing contracts by, getting, say, I think we're probably looking at level 3, getting certified?
Yes, so this is really, that's a great question, because the rollout by the government is probably not going to be the determining factor of how quickly organizations are going to see CMMC requirements. When we look at the prime contractors, from the Lockheed Martins and the Northrops and so forth, they all have very sophisticated risk management systems in place. And they're looking, as they build bid teams, as they take on new awards, to be able to minimize their risk. And they recognize suppliers are a big part of their risk. And so we're already seeing some of the large primes going out to organizations in their supply chain and saying, I know this isn't a contractual requirement today, but we want you to be ready to be certified at CMMC level 3 by the end of this year. Some of these are pretty aggressive. And again, the reason is the prime is looking at it and saying, I know an organization, even though by contract, they don't need to be CMMC level 3 yet, but if I choose, or if I have 2 to choose from, and one is CMMC level 3 and one isn't, well, the one that has achieved that certification represents less of a risk to me. And so it provides a competitive advantage to suppliers who do go through this and can represent, they're a lower risk alternative to the primes that they are working with. The government rollout is going to go through 2026, but I expect that you're going to see primes and others pushing this upon the supply chain far, far sooner than the government will.
I do have some questions I can ask.
Great.
I think you may have already answered this. The title of the webinar says the time to start is now. Why should I be starting now if most DIT contracts won't have CMMC requirements until 2023 or later? What's the rush?
Yeah, so I think and it's again another really good question. I think there's a couple of components to the answer. One, as I indicated, it's hard and it takes time, and to wait until the time that you're expecting an award, you won't be able to go through that process and be ready in time to receive that that award. This really is a journey, and you need to start now, to be there. Second is the information that is getting stolen. That's the information that belongs to each and every one of you. It's information that your companies have invested in, that they expect to get a return on. And if that information is stolen, if your intellectual property is compromised and now out in the public, you're the one who's been affected by it. If you have a breach because of a cyber incident, your reputation is affected, and your attractiveness to, again, either the government or a prime on future contracts is probably less. So there's a lot of reasons to be able to start now to make yourself more secure, but also just simply because the process of going through this journey is a long one.
You mentioned CMMC level 3. You said, how do I know what CMMC level I need to be certified at? Do you have to be certified always at level 3, or there are opportunities for lower levels?
So there are opportunities for lower levels. Level 3, however, is the minimum maturity level for an organization that is receiving controlled unclassified information. If you are receiving a flow down of the 7012 DFARS clause today, then the government or your prime contractor believes that they are exchanging CUI with you and would likely expect in CMMC times for you to be subject to level 3. The definitive answer is the requirement will be in the contract. And so first the RFI, then the RFP, and ultimately the award will specify the level at which the prime needs to be certified. The prime then will make the determination as to whether individual suppliers need to be certified at that same level or a lower level. I'm a prime, I may need to be level 5, but the information I'm exchanging with you may only require that you're at level 3. But again, anybody who has the 7012 DFARS clause today who has been self-attesting to NIST 800 171, expect that you're not going to need to be certified at CMMC level 3.
Okay. How do I select a company to help me prepare for CMMC, and how do I engage an assessor?
Well, so again, I think selecting a company to help you prepare is first about choosing somebody that is qualified. As I mentioned, not everybody who says they can help is as capable as others of being able to help. An organization that is an assessor and an advisor has the benefit of understanding exactly how an assessor is going to look at each of these requirements. And so the advice they can give you will be against, well, here's how an assessor will look at this. Here's what it is that you need to do. Again, somebody who is familiar with the particular technology stack that you're working with. Some advisors are going to be really expert in dealing with Oracle. Others are going to be more geared to working with larger businesses. And so I think it's just kind of interviewing to make sure that it's somebody who is the right fit, somebody who again is going to be familiar with your type of environment, your type of business, and I'm sure that certainly cost is going to have a factor there. Similarly, with the assessment organization, choosing somebody who's local, who doesn't need expensive travel, somebody who, again, is experienced, and somebody who is familiar with the technology stack that you use within your own organization.
So the CMMC AB has a website, and on the website there's a link called Marketplace. I think you briefly mentioned it during your presentation. Is that a good starting point to determine which RPO to work with and which C3 PAOs to work with?
So that's where they will all be listed.
Okay.
And so if you go to the accreditation body Marketplace, yes, it'll list all of the C3PAOs. C3PAOs are just kind of coming out right now. You'll see CMMC, you'll see C3PAO candidates, and you'll see authorized C3PAOs. The list of authorized CPAOs is only 3, but growing. They've just started to turn on that spigot. And in fact, the government has not started to allow actual assessments to occur. That will probably begin in the fall of this year.
Okay. So how do I know what is CUI versus what is FCI?
So that's kind of the $1 million question. One of the elements that we're all waiting for from DoD is the CMMC scoping guide, which will provide better guidance for us than is available today. There is government training available on CUI. The NARA website, NARA is responsible for the CUI program. It has a set of resources that explain what is CUI and how CUI is categorized, or which category specific CUI that you may be handling falls in. In the simplest of senses, CUI is defined as information that is created by or on behalf of the government. If you receive something in a contract and you can't find that information by Googling it, it's probably CUI. There are requirements for marking CUI. The government hasn't done a good job of implementing those standards. You're still responsible for protecting that CUI, whether it's marked or not marked. FCI, or federal contract information, is a much lower bar, but effectively anything that you receive in a contract or anything that is provided that is not marked, well, it has to be marked for public disclosure or available for public disclosure. Anything that does not have that marking is considered essentially to be federal contract information. So federal contract information, pretty broad, but the 17 practices that need to be satisfied are really, really basic cyber hygiene. They're things that you should have probably implemented within your own home for your own personal computer and network.
Great, thank you. I have one more question. Do I have time for one more question, Leanne, you think?
Let's assume that's a yes.
Yep, sorry. Yes, I could not find my unmute button. Yes, one more question, and then we'll close out with some notes about our future programs. So please stay tuned, everybody who's still on, and we appreciate it.
So there are 17 domains and 130 practices. Where does the vendor like Entrust fit into the picture? Where, I mean, how can I help organizations with the CMMC?
So, and maybe that's a question best answered by Vince. And maybe if you want to take that, I can chime in as well if you'd like.
Certainly, thanks for that question. So Entrust actually meets partially or fully 11 of the 17 domains. So we have a vast portfolio that spans across digital and physical. And where we meet fully would be in the identity authentication space. Partially, I have some documentation that I could provide after this, so we can take a deeper look into that. But we have a vested interest in cybersecurity, and that's kind of the cornerstone of Entrust. So we got about 50 plus years focusing on trust, and this is a fight that we really want to be part of and part of the community, and teaming up with folks like Stuart and RPOs and RPs.
And it kind of goes back to you don't have to build this all from scratch. There are great tools and components that are out there, Entrust being one of them. And by adopting a solution that incorporates Entrust, or you yourself incorporating Entrust in your solution, you immediately satisfy some number of those practice requirements just because you've chosen to work with Entrust.
Great.
Well said.
I just want to thank Stuart and Vince for your time today and a wonderful presentation. And I guess I'll hand it over to Leanne.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the great presentation. It's such a hard topic because it is so complex, and it's somewhat dry because you're obviously talking about something that's like future focused. It's not what's happening right this second, but it is so important for what we're doing. And I think you gave some information that was more in depth than a lot of the other presentations I've heard. So I'm glad that I was on and able to hear more. Luckily, my company has been doing a very good job with CMMC, and I will mention that you guys talked about that cost association, and just getting certified and having that assessment is a small part of the cost. There's a lot of physical stuff has to happen, a lot of changing of servers, and lots of complications. So I really appreciate you guys talking us through that, and really starting now so you can spread those costs over the next 3 years is a good idea. And George, I'm going to turn it to you for your very last farewell as hosting the meeting, and tell us what's coming up next.
Okay, so it's my last meeting, which should mark the end of our virtual meetings. I'd like to thank the speakers and our membership for tuning in. Up next is our in-person August 26th membership drive at Brambley Park in Scott's Addition. We've got our own private room from 4 to 6 upstairs, and then we'll move down to the open area from 6 to 7. So if anybody can't get there till later, it's still going to be going. December later this year, we have another industry government engagement event. So those details will be coming soon. Check our website, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts often for webinar and continuing education opportunities. And I look forward to assisting Mike, our new president, Mike Good. And I think that's going to wrap this up, and look forward to seeing everybody next month, hopefully in person.
And thanks again to our sponsors. I'm in charge of sponsorship. So if you are interested in sponsoring our post, reach out to me. We have our title sponsors, Cabrera and LeadCore, and then we have Niefler Associates and I'm sorry, I forgot.
Cardno.
Cardno. I was like, starts with a C, Cardno, who are our current sponsors. Looking forward to another great year of programs. So 2021 sponsorships are still available, and you can reach out to our email at sammycentralvirginia@gmail.com, and just let me know if you're interested, and come to our membership drive on the 26th and bring a friend and get an extra drink ticket. And it's the day before my birthday, so you can come celebrate with me. Thank you all, and we will see you on August 26th.